You're born 70,000 years ago somewhere in East Africa. Congratulations, your entire world is about 40 people. That's it. That's the whole social network. No neighbors, no rival villages, no group chat drama, just your band, your family, and whatever animal you're trying not to become lunch for today. Eventually, your group starts migrating out of Africa, and somewhere along the way, you run into something that makes your skin crawl for reasons you can't quite explain. Another kind of human. Not your kind. Heavier brow, stockier build, a different smell, different sounds coming out of its mouth. Neanderthals. And here's the thing, genetic evidence tells us your species and theirs occasionally interbred, so it wasn't pure hostility, some of it was curiosity, some of it was cooperation, but plenty of it was tension too. Competition for the same caves, the same herds, the same rivers. This is, as far as anyone can tell, the first real us versus them your ancestors ever lived through. And notice, it had nothing to do with skin color. It had everything to do with simply being a different kind of creature standing where you wanted to stand. Life is simple in the sense that simple means extremely likely to kill you. Food is scarce, predators are everywhere, and the difference between surviving winter and not surviving winter usually comes down to one thing: whether your group can trust each other enough to actually cooperate. So evolution does what evolution does. It starts rewarding brains that are really, really good at telling the difference between us and not us. Not because anyone's plotting world domination, just because a brain that instantly clocks a stranger as a potential threat keeps you alive one more day than a brain that doesn't. So let's go over the perks of this new wiring real quick, so you don't start feeling too guilty about your ancestors just yet. 1. You bond faster with your own group, which means better cooperation, better hunting, better odds of not starving. 2. You get quicker at spotting danger because unfamiliar equals unpredictable, and unpredictable equals possibly dangerous. 3. Group loyalty means somebody's got your back when the saber-tooth shows up, which statistically matters a lot more than being nice to strangers. Here's the catch. This wiring doesn't know the difference between that group might actually hurt me and that group just looks and sounds different from me. Your brain isn't running a background check. It's running a shortcut. And shortcuts, while great for survival, are absolutely terrible at nuance. You grow up learning this shortcut without anyone teaching it directly. First lesson, your own tribe smells right, sounds right, moves right. Second lesson, anyone outside it gets sorted into unknown a full half-second faster than anyone inside it, and your brain treats unknown as concerning by default. Third lesson, and this one's brutal, groups that share resources with you get trust, groups that compete with you for resources get suspicion, and it doesn't take much for that suspicion to curdle into open hostility. But that's just the beginner stuff. After a few thousand generations, things get more complicated. Populations spread out across the entire planet, and your body starts quietly rewriting itself to survive wherever it lands. Groups that end up in Northern Europe develop lighter skin over dozens of generations, purely to absorb more vitamin D from weaker sunlight. Groups that stay near the equator keep the darker skin that already worked fine for the sun they've always had. Some populations develop taller, leaner builds to shed heat faster. Others develop shorter, stockier builds to conserve it. Hair texture shifts, eye shape shifts, lung capacity shifts at high altitude, all of it slow, unglamorous, climate-driven biology. Nobody's designing a hierarchy here. It's the same process that gives you lactose tolerance if your ancestors herded cattle, or extra red blood cells if your ancestors lived in the Andes. Boring biology, not blueprint for anything. And for most of human history, none of this mattered much, because most humans never traveled far enough to meet people who looked dramatically different from them. Your average ancient human lived and died within roughly 100 miles of where they were born. Tribalism existed everywhere, sure, every valley suspicious of the next valley, but full-blown race as a concept did not exist yet, because that concept requires something ancient humans simply didn't have the technology for. Large-scale, sustained, repeated contact between distant, visibly different populations, plus a deliberate reason to start ranking them against each other. Somewhere in between migrating and forming the first real settlements, you learn the one skill nobody talks about: justification. Because humans are extremely good at building a story after the fact to explain a gut feeling they already had. You don't distrust the next valley over because of their appearance. You distrust them because they've raided your grain stores twice this decade. But your brain, lazy and efficient as always, starts quietly filing them and their appearance into the same folder. That folder is dangerous, and it's about to get used for something much worse than local tribal squabbles. After thousands of years of small-scale tribal friction, the real turning point arrives, and it's not prehistoric at all. It's shockingly recent. Somewhere around the 15th and 16th centuries, European powers start colonizing distant continents, and they run into an inconvenient problem. Enslaving and exploiting entire populations doesn't sit well with everyone's conscience, even in an era that already tolerated a lot of brutality. So a new kind of story gets built, a pseudoscientific one, claiming that certain populations are inherently biologically inferior to others, and therefore fair game for conquest and slavery. This isn't ancient tribal instinct anymore. This is a deliberate, documented, historically recent invention, built by specific people for specific economic and political reasons, and it gets dressed up in fake science to make it look natural and inevitable. That's the part your ancient ancestors never actually had. They had suspicion of outsiders. They had in-group loyalty. They had all the raw ingredients evolution hands out for free. But the idea of ranking entire populations into fixed biological categories called races, with one placed above another, that's not a caveman invention. That's a colonial era one, built centuries after your 70,000-year-old ancestor was busy worrying about lions, not skin tone. Fast forward to 1758, and a Swedish botanist named Carl Linnaeus, the same guy who invented the naming system biologists still use for every species on Earth, decides to formally sort humanity into a handful of categories, complete with confident little descriptions of temperament and character attached to each one, as if personality were a taxonomic feature like fur color or wingspan. Other scientists of the era pile on with skull measurements, facial angle charts, and elaborate rankings, all of it wrapped in the language of objective science, none of it holding up under modern genetics, which shows there's more genetic variation within any single population than there is between populations. It reads today like a group of men building an elaborate excuse, and it was, because these classifications arrive suspiciously close to the exact centuries when European empires needed a tidy justification for colonization and slavery. Convenient timing for a supposedly neutral scientific discovery. So when you're standing there imagining some prehistoric humans suddenly deciding to hate an entire group of people because of how they look, that scene never actually happened the way the question implies. What happened instead was slower, messier, and honestly less dramatic. Tribal caution, baked in by evolution for very practical survival reasons, sat around mostly dormant for tens of thousands of years, doing its narrow job of keeping small bands wary of unfamiliar strangers. Then much later, powerful institutions took that raw tribal wiring and weaponized it, built formal systems and false science around it, and turned an old survival shortcut into something new and far uglier than anything nature originally intended. Here's the twist. The myth is that ancient humans were suddenly racist, like it was some instinctive switch flipped in a cave somewhere. The reality is almost the opposite. Ancient humans were tribal, cautious of outsiders, sure, that part's real and well documented. But actual racism, the structured belief that entire populations are biologically ranked, is a relatively modern human invention, built deliberately, centuries after your ancestors were extinct, by people who had very specific reasons to want it to exist. Nature handed down caution. History added the cruelty on top. You weren't born hating people who look different from you. Nobody is. What you were born with was a brain built to keep 40 people alive in a dangerous world. Nothing more. Everything after that, every hierarchy, every justification, every fake science paper claiming otherwise, that part was built by human choices, not human instinct, and it can be unbuilt the same way it was built, on purpose.